we are live, and Brandy, why don't you tell us a little bit about Envision? What is that?
Envision is the Visual Thinkers Virtual Expo, and basically as much as I have adored being a graphic facilitator and graphic recorder, over time I've been doing, I went from being the one person in the room drawing for the group to teaching everyone the skills, and this is an opportunity to gather all of us visual thinkers more broadly. Of course, visual practitioners specifically are more than welcome to join us, but it's a 3-day live event. And it's one of those things where, trying to describe graphic facilitation, right? It's kind of ineffable, it's an experience. And I feel the same way about this event where I'm like, it's gonna be really, really good, but I can't tell you what it is yet, because I'm one of the classic facilitators, not giving the specific agenda. But it's 3 days to really connect with each other. I think of it as a really good opportunity to kind of fill your inspiration tank and to see the broad possibilities for visual thinking. I've got some really awesome guests, Heather being one of them, to join us and be part of this gorgeous 3 days. So just go to loosetooth.com. On the homepage, you'll see the link. And I feel like that page has a pretty good vibe. And if it resonates with you, I'd absolutely love to see you there.
Okay, thank you. And with that, Brandy, I think we can turn it over to you.
Awesome. Super duper. So I'm extra excited because right now is the first time I'm using, if anyone's seen my social media videos the last couple of days about building the teaching robot, this is the very first time I'm standing in front of the teaching robot. So on my screens up here, I have got your beautiful faces. So I don't feel like I'm just staring at a lens. I actually get to see you gorgeous human beings. So if you don't have your video on and you want to turn it on, I welcome that, because that is a good time. Thanks, Brian. So that was one of the first ones. Awesome. So I think I got a handle on this, but if I'm a little clunky going from screen to screen, I'm on a learning curve over here, but I'm very happy to be so. So let me hop on over to share screen. What I want to do tonight, how many people have that giant anthology, the World of Visual Facilitation? Why is Heather, I don't know why Heather's covering her face. Awesome. It's, this thick. My favorite was, I think it was somebody in Netherlands who, she went to the printer and got it split, the 5 sections split into each of their own books and spiral bound. And I'm like, that is good. So I'm sharing, if you have that book and you've seen my chapter in that, it's the value of visual organization. And I'm going to walk through that model. And personally, I am a big fan of this being more of a conversation than a presentation. So I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat over here. So there's the gorgeous logo for Envision. So just give me 1 second to change my views here so I can see you guys. Maybe I can't. Uh-oh. Huh. Well, let's see. Sorry, guys, just give me 1 second. Oh, I think I figured it out. This is so exciting. Well, as I've been developing this stuff, a lot of people are like, hey, why don't you hire somebody to do this stuff? And I'm like, I get to learn. Like, I'm so excited to learn these new tools. So there we go. Awesome. So like I said, this is the visual organization scale from the book, the giant book. Where'd it go? This guy, The Value of Visual Organization. I do like this to be more of a conversation. That's where I was distracting myself. So I will try to keep an eye out over here for the chat. But I definitely welcome clarifying questions, and I'll check in with you guys and check in with the chat to make sure what I'm saying makes sense and that it's useful. So let's see here. So happily, this is a very warm crowd. A lot of you know who I am, but just very quickly wanted to share the kind of roles I have in the world. And yeah, I fell into this work way back in 1996 when I was a young pup of 22 years old. And around 2012 was the first book, The Graphic Facilitator's Guide, the second book, The Idea Shapers. And I saw somebody held it up, which was awesome. And I'm happy to teach in person, but even happier to teach online. Nobody believes this, but I am an introvert. So actually being here with you all in my studio and just looking at that lens is the best. So those are just some of the roles in the world. The Agerbeck method is the main online course for visual thinking more broadly. And I got a couple of courses specifically on graphic facilitation. So I'm not exactly sure why I put this at the front of this presentation, but this is actually, this is probably the most powerful portfolio piece I had on my website when I had this mile-long portfolio for graphic facilitation. And it's my representation of The Wizard of Oz. Now, not everyone in the world knows the movie, but thankfully it's well known enough that somebody looks at this image and they recognize the content. So pro tip for folks who are promoting their work as visual practitioners, if somebody can actually recognize the content, they're going to go much farther in being able to recognize your skills. Because if they weren't in the room and didn't experience that drawing, it can be really hard to understand what we do, because it's already hard to understand what we do until people experience it. So this model in general, for folks who've read the Graphic Facilitators Guide, one of my favorite things ever, but one of the hardest things to write about is synthesis. How the heck do you make new meaning from what you hear? And in the Graphic Facilitators Guide, I use this parable about the bundle of sticks to demonstrate, I think it's 5 different ways that fable could be drawn from text to a highly synthesized graphic. So that was kind of the first seed of this model. But as I got more experience over the 6-7 years since then, I wanted to add a little bit more nuance to this idea of a spectrum that goes from very text-based and linear to highly spatial and synthesized. And as I walk through this model, what I'm hoping it'll do for you, the kind of tool I tried to create was for folks to recognize what skills they already have, which steps in this model do you feel most comfortable with, which ones you might want to grow into, and very importantly, what do your clients need? I think a lot of times, because I'm sort of the queen of synthesis and that's my happy place, everyone kind of assumes that all the progress should be made towards that level 7, towards that blue level. But that's not the case. It very much depends on what the client's process is, what the group needs to do. There's absolutely times you want to be at different places on this model. So we'll start out over here at the what most of us grew up with all the time, and that is linear lists and embellish lists. So this is good old what most people do with flip charts, right? I don't know how many of you have had experiences where you demonstrate even putting a title on a flip chart and your client just loses their mind. This is the best thing ever. And there are definitely times we need a list. I feel like flip charts are kind of like this amazing unsung hero in meeting rooms that I definitely encourage folks to break out of just this format. When I say embellished list, this very much is that kind of classic Mike Rohde sketch notes where he's taking a Moleskine journal and still treating it like 2 columns side by side. But he's starting to break out a sketch note in this format. I know a lot of people, often people have a broader definition of sketchnoting, but in what he teaches in his books, it starts out as those side by side columns. But he is adding more scale in the text to help organize bigger ideas and smaller ideas, little spot illustrations. So it is becoming more illustrated, even if it isn't so spatial, because again, it's still kind of all flowing in those columns. So when we start adding more spatial organization, this is where we get into popcorn and picto popcorn. How many folks use the phrase popcorn, like talking with clients and yeah. So popcorn really is when we're just scattering ideas across a surface. It's most often with clients, I'm using it for icebreakers, brainstorms, times when you don't want things to be on different levels. You don't want that kind of organization. It's important that everything stays on the same level. What I adore about popcorn is I can't, let's see how the sentence is going to work. I can't not do popcorn without clustering ideas. So, just that very simple act of not only am I just getting everything down in its own discrete part of the page, breaking that linear structure, I also have an opportunity to put similar ideas together. So that's already my brain starting to organize. And if you haven't sort of clicked into that, highly recommend start thinking the next, when you're drawing, getting popcorn up on a piece of paper or a flip chart, next idea comes in, how does that relate to the ideas that are already on the page? Some of you may do this like completely naturally. Some folks it might be, oh, wait a second, that is a choice I have. And I definitely recommend adding that to popcorn. Now, picto popcorn, this is also what I call iconitis in the books. It's one, I joke, it's when your icons are inflamed. It's picto popcorn is when you get stuck in this idea that I've captured a piece of text and now I have to put an icon with it. And the biggest problem with picto popcorn is it gets us trapped into binary thinking. So we're spending so much of our mental bandwidth just thinking, okay, what did I hear? How do I distill that language? Let's get that language up. And then, okay, what icon goes with that? And in this particular case, these icons all have to do roughly with food and ways of cooking. So like there's a microwave shape and there's some beverages and a carrot and some broccoli. And then there at the bottom, imagine it's somebody saying nutrition. And you short circuit because you don't know what to draw as an icon for nutrition. How many folks have been in that zone where you're like, okay, and then you stop listening, right? You stop, you kind of take yourself out of being present in that room with those clients. So the biggest thing here is well, I'm just short-circuited. How's that? I think there is a place for iconography in charts. If folks have kind of, studied me in particular, you'll see that there actually isn't a whole lot of pictorial drawing in my charts because, I will add in icons later once I make sure that I'm using my bandwidth first for the listening and the distilling and the organizing. And the organizing has to do with, are there connecting lines? Am I using scale? Is there something color coded? So those are all choices that are extremely useful in visual that isn't doing that binary translation between icon and image. Does that make sense? Any questions about sketch notes or popcorn or this kind of linear format or popcorn? I see we're talking about printed versus digital books. My experience, a lot of people like to first read the print book, but then they like having an ebook to reference because it's so darn easy to carry around. Does it make sense so far?
Yep.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Voice from Beyond. I appreciate that. Awesome. So now we're at the point where we've broken the linear shape and we're getting more spatial. And my biggest warning about picto popcorn is it stops us from being able to be present, to listen, and make different visual choices that aren't that binary translation. And this is an example of popcorn that's perfectly appropriate. So this was a really quick kind of grouping of closing thoughts at the end of a day. And you can see there's kind of two clusters here, two sets of popcorn, one set with a different kind of bullet point than the other one. And this is exactly what they needed for that really rapid fire end of the day, what happened here kind of note taking. And I've done plenty of it. There's times where this is exactly what you need. This is an example. Yeah, so this is the same content of The Wizard of Oz. Here I was actually trying to mimic, at the time, this was 2006. I think there's a date in that corner. Oh, no, it's not 2018. But it was trying to mimic more of sort of the Grove style with the pastels. With the Grove style, you get a lot of working in columns, even though you have a big piece of paper. And business-wise, at that time, I needed to differentiate and say, okay, for folks who've seen this and they want to hire the person who makes this, I'm the wrong person. So it was a portfolio piece specifically designed to help differentiate. But here what we have is a lot of that. Here's a piece of text, here's an icon. Now the Wizard of Oz is very visual and we know the characters. So for me to make, you know, Star People versions of the witch and the scarecrow and the lion and the Tin Man and all, you know, all these different characters is not a big stretch. But definitely I'm always prioritizing the text first. So the next step is very much like you saw here, and that's what Anthony Weeks coined as scattergram. So the anthology I was very happy to co-edit, drawn together through visual practice alongside Kelvy and Sam and Jennifer Shepard, Sam Brad, Kelvy Bird. Anthony Weeks gave us a beautiful chapter about storytelling and listening, and he defined this type of capture called scattergram, which is very much sort of the picto-popcorn with a title. And we see a whole lot of this. We see a ton of this. You may draw a whole bunch of this. Again, you know, it's if you're there capturing this kind of level of recording, it's absolutely valuable because that group feels listened to. In my opinion, you have opportunity to do more organization in the chart. This is what I call in the Idea Shapers a poster full of postage stamps. So there isn't connectivity between ideas. There isn't a sense of flow. It's just sort of, here's the next idea, here's the next idea, here's the next idea, sort of scattered across the page. And again, that still being able to listen well, distill, and capture is very important. I just want to encourage folks to get more aptitude farther to the right, because it'll help us bring more value to our projects. Any questions or comments about scattergrams? Or about that sample of the Wizard of Oz samples or anything like that? I see a thumbs up. Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, the little star people of the Wizard of Oz folks, that was great.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I was on a project once, and I do come from a drawing background, so I already kind of had that in my pocket coming into this work, which is extremely valuable, though we have to make sure we're drawing fast, right? Mm-hmm. And I was on a project and I was drawing my like everyman character, and a participant came up, and I'm thinking, how jaded does this person have to be? This participant came up and they're like, oh, at least you're not drawing star people. And I was like, when did a star person hurt you? Like, what is your problem with star people? They're very effective. You know, they take a little practicing to get, you know, those points to go in the areas you want. But yeah, it was just a funny thing where I'm like, all right, yes, they're not star people. So I'm for being people. I'm for star people. I'm for any kind of icon like that really adds life and personality to the charts. That is definitely the first kind of imagery I teach. If you read the graphic facilitator's guide, there's a set of elements to graphic facilitation in the drawing section that's the essential 8. And out of those 8, the only thing that's representational is people, because they add so much of that expression and personality and help people connect to the drawing. So this is a perfect example of when I needed to make a scattergram. And this is, I'm getting somebody's background sound. I see Chris there. Thank you, Chris. I think it might have been you. Perfect. So this was I was like, wait, I just told the story because I had a drawing as a verb session this morning. I had a project that was with a big old hospital system. It was their annual conference. It was about 400 people in the room, and, you know, classic big ballroom, no windows. And I love that they did this, and they were an absolutely wonderful organization to work with. What they were doing was they had picked 21 people to come up on stage at different points in the, no, actually all of it was in the morning. So day 1, day 2, day 3. Come up and give a talk, like a 2 or 3 minute talk as like kind of one of the voices within this organization around, as you can see here, this theme of experience exceptional. And going into it as the person capturing this, I'm thinking a couple different things. One is these are all going to be so quick, and they're all going to be so different from each other because they really curated a bunch of different experiences out of this set of 21. I'm also thinking, okay, I'm going to have 3 sets, 3 kind of, you know, sets that I'm going to want to put together in one graphic. So in this event, I actually had my big board with my paper tape to it, and I penciled off this area each morning for this set, and then whatever came immediately after went to the right of that. But I'm looking at this knowing that I want to fit it together. So I actually had a little sketch on my clipboard where I had figured out what color each one of these would be. So when I put the three together, it looked this planful, this kind of, worked out. And I don't know how many folks have experienced this, but also knowing that these are folks who weren't public speakers. And this was a huge stakes for them, that they were up on that main stage telling their story for those couple minutes. And because I knew that this was the kind of production where they had that absolutely ironed out, I was like, hey, can I get the scripts? Not that I was worried about my listening skills, but I was worried that if somebody got up there and they just, they short-circuited, like we were talking about with the Picto popcorn, I wanted to make sure I was able to represent them because they were doing something really important. Happily, all 21 folks did beautiful jobs, and this is where the poster full of postage stamps was definitely the right call, the right level to be at. And Chris is saying the tricky thing with the scattergram is spacing everything out well. Yeah, I've used up half my paper too soon. Yes. I think most of the time I want to make whatever the first two or three things are. If I could scale it like a computer, about 30% less, because you think, oh, I got all the space in the world. So I feel you on that one. So now we're getting into more structure and more hierarchy. The idea that big ideas are big and little ideas, so the big main idea, let me step. I'm gonna take a deep breath. I'm a little overheated here in my studio. Very simple idea that you're gonna make those main ideas bigger and those supporting details smaller. And to make very simple choices with how you capture text to make that more clear. Now here, this is something I call blobs and stems because I'm using these very forgiving blob shapes. And this is something I would do time and time and time again for report outs. So, but it could also be 5 topics, it could be 5 teams, it could be 5 topics, but I'm making the same kind of structure across them. So at a glance, you can see here were the 5 main topics or ideas or teams. And then I know exactly what the top level content was, and then the points underneath that and the points underneath that. And this is really just, helping you very quickly see the groupings and getting that sense of hierarchy. So we're not getting everything absolutely on the same level. I had a project that, we talk about a lot of times when I'm talking with colleagues, we're talking about, what is it that how do you represent your work? How do you represent your work so people understand what the experience is? How do you represent the work in a way that what is it you can share? What is it you can't share? We do a lot of internal meetings where we can't share what we do. I think a lot of people feel like they can only share their fanciest stuff, but most of the time we're doing very unfancy stuff. For example, I had a big project, food company. They were testing out new food ideas. It was a bunch of corporate chefs coming together, all vendors for this company, and they were coming up with these new products, like actually cooking them and taste testers tasting them. By the way, it was in commercial kitchens, which was an acoustic nightmare. We only had space for a flip chart. So there's definitely, that's the parameters around this was it had to be fast. I had to listen extra hard, and mostly it just had to be super fast because we had 4 teams, and each of the teams came up with anywhere from 3 to 7 concepts. This is exactly the kind of thing I was doing. Here's the concept in the center. Here's the reactions around it. Flip over the flip chart onto the next one, and just that kind of rapid fire. But that's exactly what that project needed. But very simple choices that I made helped it be more organized. There was a color set for each of the teams. So not only could they look around the room when they were making their decisions and go, okay, that was on a blue chart or that was on a green chart, but also when they had that deck, their slide deck after the event, same kind of idea. They could very quickly get to the information they needed, and they understood, these are all this team, whereas these are all this team. And, wasn't like super duper duper sexy, but it was exactly what that client needed. And I see, how would you contrast blobs and stems to mind maps? Super simple, similar. I'd say they're cousins to each other. Yeah, I think what I like about blobs and STEM, I'm not anti-mind map. I think of mind maps as kind of like a gateway drug because they're taking something people already understand, which is an outline, and then they're making it more spatial by putting those spokes around a hub. And there's lots of resources out there about it. I love that people are learning mind maps. They're one specific shape. So, you know, in this case, you do truly have basically 5 mind maps, right? And there's 2 of them are kind of connected with a common point. But to my mind, I might have, you'll see a couple examples coming up where it's a chart that isn't just blobs and stems, but, you know, I could be listening and think, okay, this is a set of information. So within this bigger chart that has things, you know, different ways of representing different parts of this conversation, here in this part of it, it's appropriate to do a good old blobs and stems. So, you know, Brian's saying this is exactly how I've referred to mind maps as a gateway drug. Yeah, yeah, that's when we do our work. Little aside, you know, again, the challenge of describing what this work is. You know, how many folks have had somebody say, "Oh, are you like the courtroom, the person who draws people in the courtroom?" I'm seeing a couple nods, right? Or are you like the guy in the was a FedEx? It was a UPS commercial. This is years ago now, but there was a UPS. I think it was a UPS commercial, right? Where they were where it was they were drawing on a whiteboard. What's that? There's a couple other ones. Does anyone? What do other people have where they kind of get the? Heather was introduced as a graphic reporter, but those things where, you know, you collect them over time and you hear them a lot. Are you the cartoonist, right? And it's one of those things where, because you know what your work is, you know, sometimes it's like, you wince, but of course, I hope you don't wince in front of the actual person asking the question. But can you draw my caricature? For sure. And they're just trying to connect what you do to something they already know, right? And that's, you know, do you make graphic novels? Yeah. And absolutely, Heather, thank you. That it's an opportunity to have a conversation. And usually if somebody says, "Oh, is what you do like mind maps?" my standard answer is, it's kind of like that. And sometimes it looks like that, but it can take a lot of different shapes. So I always think when I get those kind of questions, how can you acknowledge the connection they're making in their own mind and help bridge them closer to what the heck you actually do? So, and that definitely comes with experience. Knowledge curator, Mateo, that's a sexy phrase. Are there knowledge curators out in the world? Or I don't know, is that somebody called you a knowledge curator?
Yeah, it's just, someone can't remember what I actually do. And it's a colleague too. It's just
nice.
Good enough. It's good enough. Yeah.
It's close. It's in the neighborhood. Yeah. Information architect. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's that broader idea of visual thinking in so many different ways we can apply it. And yeah, curate is the word of the day, Chris, for sure. Knowledge alchemist. And Heather is a corporate graffiti artist. Yeah, for sure. So even though this looks pretty basic and it definitely looks like it's related to the mind maps, I often see charts that don't even have this kind of hierarchy built into them. Again, it's much more of that level 2 or 3, everything just kind of stuck to the piece of paper, but you don't have a sense of, this is a bigger idea, here are the ideas connected to it. So in this, I'm trying to demonstrate the steps of organization that help let you get more and more knowledge and more value in what you're drawing for those clients. And this is an example of a cluster. I'm a big fan of putting things in the center. I know it could be scary for folks. This is one of the concepts in the Idea Shaper book, which is called the anchor. But this was a handout that my very good friend and colleague John Ward and I created when we did a session for the IAF North America Conference, the International Association of Facilitators. And you know, it's that same kind of expansive model. And the idea is that even though starting in the center seems really scary, you actually have given yourself these kind of pie slices that get wider as you get closer to the edges of whatever that canvas is. So I'm a big fan of starting there and working out. Yeah, Kate loves starting at the center start for sure. Now that is if you have an extremely clear sense of what the heck the topic is. There's definitely sessions where you're like, I couldn't even tell you what to draw there. I've had situations where I kind of penciled out myself a space in the center and just started working that way and then filled it in. That's more risky because, if they don't come to a conclusion, if there isn't kind of that beautiful punctuation mark to put in the center, that can definitely bite you in the butt. That's the professional term. So, yeah, and Greg says white space left over, definitely more pleasing that way, for sure. Yeah, with that kind of shape, let's go this way. Now this was something prepared as a handout, so it's very, very even. But when you're in a live conversation, you don't know what shape it's going to take. And for those of us who like a lot of order, you might find yourself kind of trying to make, this amoeba, it starts out in the middle and starts growing over the course of the conversation. I think some folks are trying to make that amoeba kind of fit into a more even shape. But really, if it turns out that, that second point ends up being a really big part of the conversation, that expansive arm of that amoeba is important information. So if you're one of those folks who wants everything to turn out really nice and tidy, just look at that and see are you actually making the experience more orderly than it was. Because I think, at a glance, you can see, wow, we really had a lot to say about idea number 2, but we had nothing on 4. But those are the visual cues we're building for our clients. Kate says, cheat with sticky notes and cover up the wrong idea. Yeah, for sure. And Greg puts up reminders as he goes. Awesome. Yeah, this is, but again, even though this is a pretty darn simple shape and it's very much like mind maps, you can see in this drawing, there's the first level of the title, the second level of the 6 points. Which is also kind of labeled with the stars, numbered with the stars. So maybe that's level 2.5, but you got the main idea, if you think about the visual information in this chart, the highest level is the title, the criteria. The next level are the 6 points. The next level are the pieces coming off of each of those individual points. You've got, in some cases, you've got even a 4th level going down from that, like over here, model behaviors you want. There's a 5th level with something like this, which is this band that says spatial. So there's actually lots and lots of layers of information there. So you can fit a lot of complexity in a drawing. In this case, I say, a lot of mind maps kind of go this many levels, but you can pack a lot in, especially with that starting in the center. Now here we're going from more hierarchy and groupings, even if it's blobs and stems, and we're adding, we're pushing the scale even farther, and we're starting to create some structure. So all these examples are kind of roughly using this idea of the topic being food. So here, maybe it's the big, bold visual bet of the title in the center and this big old fork. If I do place a bet like that, I'm always thinking about, well, what can I do with it? If I have in this case, if I have a fork, I added 4 details off the tines. If somebody says 5 things, that's not necessarily going to work, but you can kind of think about, how can I build off that big bet that I'm placing? Here on the left and the right towards the middle, you see 2 examples of level 4, those structured clusters. When the reason that there's blue on this yellow-green chart is that's when you are, and there's different opinions about how much you should or shouldn't do this, but in Brandy's world, because I'll take full responsibility for the kind of work I do. I would say that everything that's in that yellow-green is well organizing exactly what was said in the room. And then blue is when you're starting to make meaning for the clients. You're finding those patterns, you're making those connections, you're pulling out those themes. For instance, at the very tip of that blue 5B pointer, pulling out a theme that you're hearing. It may not be that somebody said those exact words in that banner, but they're starting to, as a group, figure out, oh, okay, what we're really trying to do is X. And that's a great way to kind of demonstrate that piece that's more synthesis. Does that make sense? Yeah, I see 1 thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, 3 thumbs up.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. But here again, it's pushing scale even more, and having some kind of structure. Now we're going to jump over. Oh, here. Okay, so this would be an example of that in this drawing, and I'm sure this was a event that was much more of an open-ended conversation. So, oh, this was a keynote speaker. I can see that from, since it's labeled that way. So the topic was managing diverse talents, or the title was managing diverse talents in a global marketplace. And I placed a big bet with this, visual of the globe. I can't, this was years ago, so I'm not exactly sure how this grew as the presentation went on, but, kind of giving that title a container as the shape of this globe. At some point I was able to kind of do the stems with these dotted lines over here in the upper left. But on this chart, you can see that there is different sets of information. There's kind of different vignettes within the chart. So there is pushing scale more, there is some structure, but it doesn't all fit into one solid composition. We get more of that when we get over here to level 6. Now 6 is when you really kind of have, you're looking at the piece of paper like a whole composition. And this was something that in my very early days, so my first 3 years I was contracting for Ernst & Young using MG Taylor's change management process with Ernst & Young's clients. And before I left, or as I went, I was often teaching people. And at the time, thankfully, I fell into work. I had a lot of good skills for immediately, but I didn't have the vocabulary. I was able to do the work, but I had no idea how to describe it. Either teaching those folks in those rooms, my colleagues, or once I went out in the world and started marketing. So that came later. But when I would be working with folks, I would always say more white space and more connections. It was always more white space and more connections. And it took me a huge amount of time to recognize, oh, it's because of my experience as an artist. It's because of not only I'm an artist, but one of my great loves is composition. So what is the composition of a whole image? How is your eye moving through it? How are you using color to guide? And I'm also just a freak about negative space. So those two things, I was like, oh, wait a second. Those just happen to be two things I came into this work with, but I didn't even know how to describe that. So, and when you see the Grove charts, it's very much kind of working on a very verbal model of like newspaper columns. So that's a different approach from a different background. But I'd say at level 6, you're really thinking about what is the shape of this whole piece. Now in this example, this would be an example where the event would be talking about something like food and culture. And I say, okay, I've got food and culture, and I do love using a large human figure, even if it's my very stylized guy. Marceline was saying negative space is an art in itself. It's a different frequency to tune into. And I understand that a lot of folks, it's like they're blind to it. But once you start noticing what isn't there, it's super sexy to see, like Greg's point about, starting in the center, you can get some really great shapes. You get those really great shapes because you're noticing the entire shape because of the white space around it. The music is the space between the notes. Yes, thank you, Catherine. I love that. I had to get something printed for the Envision project, and it's a worksheet because I'm sending people physical kits before this virtual event. And it's a worksheet where there's an image in the center and then there's a whole lot of white space around it on purpose because it's a worksheet and people need space to write. And I sent it to a printer where clearly this has never happened in their world. I had to approve the proof 3 times because they thought it was wrong, and still somebody cropped it. So I got these, what came to me was the central image pushed out to the edges. And I went, so anywho, but that's a case where, that's folks are like, no, this is clearly wrong because there's way too much white space, but that white space had a very specific purpose for this particular print job. So imagine that this is an event Oh, that's awesome. Kate's saying that Linda Berry mailed out kits for her comics class. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a total game changer when you can combine some good physical materials with the virtual experience, for sure. And Chris is saying, in the digital world, it reminds me of Prezis. Is that about the Chris, do you want to explain that? Because I remember Prezis. Is that around negative space?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
No, it's how with the Prezi is an alternative to a PowerPoint presentation.
Yep.
The Prezi sort of gets microscopic and macroscopic. Like you start by looking at a small part of the image, and then as you explain things more and more, you expand out and out until you see the whole picture. For sure. That's awesome. Thank you for that comparison, Chris. Did everyone hear Chris? Is that okay? The idea you can think on the micro up to the macro. Awesome. Yeah, and that's what I thought when I first learned about Prezi. I'm like, that is a really elegant way to use that tool. I just wish more people actually used it that way instead of just a way to zoom around an image and without structure. Like the sort of like, we're going to look at all these things instead of thinking about how do all these things fit together into that bigger macro view. For sure. So imagine that this project, seasickness, absolutely. The nausea from Prezi, oh boy. Yeah, the roller coaster, absolutely. And Mateo's like, now we can do that more mural, for sure. So imagine that this particular example here in green would be part of an event where we're talking about food and culture. And again, I'm very fond of starting out with some kind of central figure. And kind of like the fork, but way more useful than the fork. If I have a large scale human on my chart, there's so many different things I can add to that human. And I do it because I want either the attendees to see themselves in the chart, or I want them to see whoever they're talking about in the chart. Like if it's voice of the consumer, or they're talking about HR, and that person could represent one of the employees. Other times I think you'll see at least one example of this, where I'll have, if it's something about dialogue or conversation or collaboration, it'll be two figures facing each other. Now, even though I might place this as a very large bet on the piece of paper, I know that it's very malleable. There's a lot of different things I can put on that figure. And you'll notice here in any example that you see, they're always drawn in a lighter color because I can draw over it. And so no matter how much or how little I add to it, it kind of feels like it belongs there. Marceline says, human and or central image as representative of a system. Usually if it's a system, I might do something more like a square or that blob shape and have individual faces in it. In my personal opinion, I think distinguishing humans from the systems is a useful distinction. And Brian says, it occurs to me that the human figure is your primary metaphor, sort of the same way the Grove uses large-scale landscapes and Kelvy uses small natural elements. Yep, they're all complex systems. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's definitely part of my vocabulary. And the reason I like it is, again, because it's humanizing, and because it gives structure immediately. I call it scaffolding. So if I walked up to this chart, I would have drawn this figure and that horizontal line, knowing that I'm going to use the space above the line for anything having to do with the human eating, and then anything below the line about the food itself. But, again, that's so broad that I'm not putting myself in too small of a box. And again, I don't know how much or how little is going to go on that figure or below that line or above that line. So does that make sense to folks? Scaffolding, awesome. I'm glad that's useful. I think for a lot of folks, I don't know how many folks have seen me draw live at one of the IFEP conferences, and I don't know that I necessarily started with I probably did, but if I started with the large scale figure, but that's that kind of thing that makes a lot of people kind of gulp, like, what did you just do? But it's that scaffolding. A whole lot of different things can hang off of it. Yeah, here we go. Two people facing each other. This was for a university. And Catherine asks, can you do this on the fly? I'm just gobsmacked by that. Brian's reminding me of,
I was doing the opening key. He wrote in the chat, if you're not looking at it, does anyone have a big black one? I was doing the opening keynote in New York, and my black big one Neuland marker was not working properly, and so I asked for a big black one in front of the room. In context, it makes perfect sense. So this idea of are you, are you able to do this on the fly? Oh yeah, I ducked behind the podium. I'm like, all right, we'll let that laughter subside before I stand back up. Yeah, yeah, I can laugh at myself. That's totally fine. So doing it on the fly, I can, but that's also because I happen to be somebody who has a brain very much wired for synthesis, and I'll pick up that point in a moment. So in this case, I went into this project knowing that this conversation for this university was going to be about scholars and practitioners working together. So it was very natural for me to put a figure representing the scholar, a figure representing the practitioner, and then this space in between them. I've used this kind of structure a lot, where just having two figures facing each other creates 5 kind of zones. I don't know if I put that, no. 5 kind of zones. If you think from left to right, you would have, in this case, you know, the very left part of the drawing could be what is the person on the left bringing, like what is their history or culture or context, and then like what's kind of behind them or supporting them. You can have things attached to specifically more present tense to that figure. You have the space that they share in between, and then again on the second figure, that idea of what are present tense things, and then what are kind of past tense or larger context ideas around those two figures. I didn't put that diagram in here. Does that make enough sense? Nope, doesn't make sense. I got some nods, some shakes. It's just thinking about if I've drawn two figures, there's the space around each figure, and then there's the space between them. So I can simplify that and sort of like that 3 broad areas versus me getting too specific with the 5. But one of the first times I did that, it was a cultural organization working with, they were trying to figure out their sponsor relationships. So they could better understand where the sponsors were coming from, because all the work they had done previous to that was so organization specific. You know, sort of like, well, you give us money and then we make art, right? But having these figures and having this big canvas and having that sense of what do we bring to the table, what do they bring to the table, and what do we create together, was that very broad scaffolding you could do, that you could put a lot of different ideas in. Does that make more sense? All right. Yeah, we're still on my New York faux pas. And this is a TED Talk I've used as content when I lead my lab, which is 6 people for 3 days, lots and lots of hands-on work. And, you know, this is about listening. It's a very short TED Talk, 5 ways to listen better. And, you know, even in this, I just gave myself a giant head, made sure the ear was there. Don't always have the ear there. But even here, you can see how many levels of information there are just in this drawing. And that you can understand sets of information because of the visual choices. So very clearly you understand the 5 steps are those 5 yellow circles. And then the text coming off of those are the labels, and then the details underneath. And then we have a different set with that cluster losing our listening at the bottom. We have kind of this pair of content, the better living through conscious listening and teaching our children how to listen. That happened to be kind of the punctuation marks that the speaker gave at the end of the talk. But just by making sets of choices, we can fit a lot of different levels of information and types of information all in the same chart. And Sarah says, I really love that composition for a dialogue. I've been looking for inspiration on how to visually capture difficult conversations. Yeah, this will work beautifully. Good. Use it in good health. I hope that's very useful to you for sure. And certainly, and also there might be cases where, you know, is there something between those 2 figures that they're both working towards? Is there, you know, sort of in this guy, we've got that, it looks really clunky in this drawing because I drew it in black, but there's sort of the sense of the space. That can be also be a very simple thing to add to this kind of composition. Is there a certain context people are working in? Is it a certain community the groups are working in? Are these two figures, like here you actually have those two thick blue dotted dashed lines. That's kind of that the scholars are working in their system and the practitioners are working in their system, but they have those open doors towards each other. So, those are just ways we can add a little bit more context around two human beings figuring stuff out, or two types of human beings or groups figuring stuff out. David says, when you number things, are they meant to be sequential or priority or just a list of elements? How do you use the numbers? Yeah, that's, in this case, he was very, 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 very explicitly, number one is this, number two is this. Often I won't put numbers in. How many times have we had an experience where somebody says there's 5 things and they legitimately didn't share 5 things, right? Maybe they just like skipped over one. The best case of this, oh my gosh, that same story where I had those beautiful 21, pieces of popcorn, the voices from the different folks around the organization. That same event, there was a gentleman who came in and said, these are the 8 pillars. And I think it was actually like the 8 pillars of trust or something. It's the 8 pillars. And how many times have you seen this? In his 45-minute keynote, he told you 4, but you had to buy the book for the other ones. So I created this giant scaffolding of, it was like these columns at the top, and I didn't finish them, but they were kind of like set, the tops of those columns were at the top of the page, and I'm going, column number 1, column number 2, because it was that structured. And what did I was, if I was going to be really cheeky, I was thinking of putting a banner across the empty space on the right hand of the chart, buy the book. I said something more diplomatic than that, but that's definitely the risk of numbers. So I don't tend to number things very often unless it's something that explicit from the speaker. There are cases where it can be used to prioritize. I know some people hate dot votes. Do folks know, anyone need a dot vote primer? Looks like okay. So, you might do a dot vote where, you've got these beautiful clusters of dots across a big brainstorming piece of paper. And then, then it is going in and counting, and often I'll just label the biggest ideas, like this one got 25 votes, this one got 18. But honestly, numbering is very much when, like I said, was this conversation or this morning's conversation? That impulse to be really tidy and organized. And there's lots of times that the conversation isn't that tidy and organized. So that's definitely, for me, isn't the default. I love that Kate wrote, columns 5 through 8 equal capitalism. Totally. Awesome. Was that useful, David? I know that was pretty broad, but.
Yeah, it's very useful because a lot of times people present ideas, and the linear thinkers will often think, in sequence, but many times in systems things, relationships are quite complex. So it's good to let people know that those aren't necessarily linear and counting. Yeah. So I think it's the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm personally somebody who loves the emergence. I love the messiness. But there's plenty of people who that makes them really uncomfortable. That's not letting yourself, kind of letting your work reflect the messiness that they're going through. I know Heather was with me this morning, and we were talking about, how do you set clients' expectations? If they're looking at portfolio pieces that are like these masterpieces that are perfectly composed, and you're in an event where they need the flip chart in the commercial kitchen and just, super fast clusters, it's how do you set the expectations that if they're having a messy conversation, that chart is going to look messier. I consider this, that's a pretty like packed kind of clunky chart, but in my opinion, but it was, it reflected what happened in that group. There was a nice sense of balance because there was balance in the way they set up that particular part of the agenda. But yeah, that's the shape it took. If it's the amoeba with the giant arm, that's the shape it took. And when we force too much structure when it isn't there, it doesn't reflect their process. And here we've got beautiful blue number 7, synthesis. And in the graphic facilitators guide with with the parable, what I did in those examples is, it was sort of, with Aesop's fables or parables, you have the story and then you have the moral of the story. And 7 can end up being just the moral of the story without the fable itself. And if you were to do that live in front of people, only show them the moral of the story, they wouldn't see their experience reflected in that drawing. So in my opinion, the number 7 synthesis, I think it works when it's sprinkled in. You have their conversation captured, but you are making some of that higher level meaning. But truly, a lot of the level 7 synthesis isn't what happens live. To the question about, do you do this on the fly? Was it Catherine maybe? It is something that's the communication piece that comes out of the event. You may have something more like that, those 2 figures during the event, but then I might be working with a client to say, okay, now how do we communicate this to the wider organization? That's a different function. I've definitely been hired to do this live where I am listening and creating synthesis, but I'm not set up in the room the same way I would be if I was capturing their content live. Instead I'm off to the side, because if there's too much of a disconnect between their experience and what I'm doing, if I'm doing that kind of synthesis. Does that make sense? All right, so there are times I have been hired to do that live, like this very specifically live, like you're just here to tell the story to the wider organization, and to the point about, do you do this live? That's something that took me a really long time to recognize that, oh, wait a second, that is how I personally am wired. It isn't how everyone's wired. There's plenty of some folks think super duper quickly. Some people see patterns super duper quickly. Sometimes some folks need more time to process and step back, that it isn't possible to do that in the moment. And that's, as long as you recognize, is that a aptitude you have or not, that's the biggest thing. So if you find that you are really good at synthesis, but you need time, then it's like talking to the client, setting the expectations that, if you want to, I can go back to my studio and create this synthesis image, this sort of summary image to the bigger group. But yeah, personally, it was, I was, swimming in my own fishbowl. And I went, oh, right. That's just because I happen to have the brain that can think that fast and work that fast. And I love synthesis. Like in high school, I wrote a paper that was 2 sentences long, and it wasn't because I was trying to get out of work. It was because that was what I did. And thankfully, the teacher understood that. So what are other people's experience with this idea of how much can you organize and synthesize on the fly? Or, are there ways that you set yourself up to be able to do this stuff more on the right that's not necessarily live? Anyone have a story or a question or a comment? Mateo's kind of wiggling over there. I don't know if that means he has something to say.
It means maybe, like understanding the flow of the conversation for the time allotted helps, like knowing the projected lay of the land, because it will change at any moment.
Exactly.
And so then having that potential foresight can help me strategize, like, all right, this one, it's going to be this wonderful bubble up thing where I synthesize. This one will be a popcorn of some sort, and be ready to throw it all out the window at any moment.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly. Hold it lightly, because it will change. No, that's a great point. I really appreciate you saying that, Mateo, because it is, how clear is the client going into the event? How does the agenda have new agenda smell because it's just was created the day before? Do you have clients who are good at kind of being collaborative about talking through the agenda? All those are giving you all those clues of, okay, I think this section is probably going to be popcorn. I think this section probably is going to be this more emergent, longer conversation, so I can, kind of see what shape that piece of the event goes. But yeah, that's new agenda smell. I'm telling you, I talk about this a lot in events more and more, because there's a lot of us. I'm not going to project on anybody here present today. I came from a very dysfunctional family. But coming out of a very dysfunctional family, I have amazing listening skills because I'm listening and I'm also listening to what's not being said. Really strong skills being able to read people and sense tension and ease and all that kind of good stuff. And it also, the ground was always moving. So, being adaptable in the moment, those are all things I came into the work with. I know I'm not alone. But those are the kind of things that it's not exactly the kind of gift you wanted to give yourself, but it does help you come into the work with that sense of, oh, things are changing. Oh, you just made this up yesterday? All right. So, and in my experience, clients are always very diplomatic and kind, but I do, every so often I hear kind of a horror story from a client where they had a bad experience with a fellow, a colleague, and it always comes down to two things. It's either lack of content, they're just not getting the stuff on the page, or lack of adaptability. And that's the thing where something changes and then the person just kind of like can't handle that, things changed. And if anyone's been in that situation, I'm not trying to put anyone down, because there are things that change really quickly and it can be difficult for sure. But the more, like Matteo said, it's going to change, the more that you can cultivate that attitude. Honestly, I think that trait, that characteristic is honestly supersedes the specific listening, thinking, and drawing skills. Like that's the big guy that kind of goes above all the specific skills we're using in the moment. And Chris said, I worked closely with the presenter to design a poster explaining blockchains before the presentation, because what are they? Yeah, thankfully I kind of was transitioning out of live work as cryptocurrency became ultra popular as a topic. But by the way, if you want to understand blockchain and cryptocurrency, there's a podcast called The Missing Crypto Queen, done by the BBC. Has anyone heard that one? Yeah, it's fascinating. But that was the first time I'm like, oh, wait a second, they did a great job in that podcast describing it. Marceline says, sometimes where I find synthesis, I opt for the form of a question. What about this? What about that? Yeah, the great thing about...
Sorry, it's Marceline. I just want
Marceline, thank you.
rephrase. I meant to say where I find it hard to find synthesis.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the reason that's hard with questions is they're very generative. And if you're asking this question and people are answering and coming up with more ideas, you don't really know where the edges are to figure out, what exactly is it that you're trying to organize. So I can definitely understand that. And I am a big fan of when there's conflict in the room, or you have the devil's advocate or the more negative person in the room, and they say that very declarative negative thing. That's not what I put on the piece of paper. I always flip it into a question, because I know if I did capture what they said verbatim, it would stop the conversation. So that can you keep the conversation going and be more in that generative mindset. Matteo says, I wonder, is that where Marker Ninja comes from? Agility in the moment? I don't know, actually. Yeah, I mean, I've certainly heard Marker Ninja, but I'm not exactly sure. Oh, Trent, was that Trent you said? Was Marker Ninja? Cool. David asks, have you ever synthesized a talk or presentation with few images with little or no text? Yes, I've had plenty of things that were far more about the shape and and it's much more abstract, much more diagrammatic. Like even in this example here, it's a human figure holding a plate of food, but all the rest of the visuals behind it are about color choice and line weight and proximity. This was my previous relationship when I was dating a philosophy professor, and this was me helping him make the best poster presentation for an academic conference. But this was something that was summarizing his paper and worked as that communication piece that was a much higher level of detail than the paper. This was something when Sam Brad, we're going into 2016, Sam asked some colleagues to kind of reflect on what, reflections on 2015 and what we were looking forward to. So this was, very much like a synthesis piece We got good old VUCA, which I'm sure we've been hearing constantly since then. Yeah, David says when the synthesis becomes a symbol, for sure. And I think there's truly, you know, like I said, in the Essential 8, the only thing that's representational or pictorial in the Essential 8 in the Graphic Facilitator's Guide is people. Everything else is more diagrammatic and abstract and about organizing and processing information. In the Agerbeck Method online course, there's 9 modules. Image is number 8 out of 9. And I very explicitly put, I don't actually have, oh no, I do actually. Hey, look, there's my book. I was using it earlier. So this book is 400 pages, over 400 pages. And exactly this much of the book at the very end is about imagery. Because I want to teach folks all this amazing thinking you can do with shapes and lines and scale and all that good stuff. So yeah, there's, yeah, just so much good, AKA the big one, yeah. The other big one, the yellow big one instead of the black big one. The second funniest moment, I don't know. But yeah, there's, again, so much meaning making we can make that's not pictorial images. And I think so many folks who, you know, generally speaking, people tend to come into this work either from the art side, where they have the drawing skills, or they come from the people side. And I've said this 1,000 times, and I'll say it again. The people who come from the drawing side, they actually have a bigger challenge of unlearning a lot of the ways they draw to help it fit and adapt into this live work. And that's where you get into the lack of content. You know, most often when clients have had a problem with a colleague and lack of content, it was they were drawing this big elaborate thing and completely missing the conversation. But I think, you know, to take somebody who already has the drawing skills and to teach the thinking and developing, whether I'm teaching or they're developing for themselves, but to develop the thinking skills and develop the listening skills, I personally think that's a bigger challenge than having somebody come in who has the people skills and the listening skills, and very likely already has they're already making the patterns and doing the processing. Throw in those shapes and those lines and that color and that scale, all that stuff. That's actually extremely easy, much easier to add than trying to unlearn habits that folks have had for a very long time. Does that resonate with folks? Are there any like die-hard artists, illustrator, drawers who went, holy crow, I do not get to draw in the same way when I do this work? Anyone willing to share a story? Yuppers, Laura says yuppers. She doesn't look like she wants to share anything specifically though. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, anyone feel like they came from the people side, was drawing like the super duper intimidating, scary thing? Oh look, we're on the question slide. Yeah. Yeah. Is Mateo, are you nodding at the drawing being scary? And Kate says yes, bad at drawing.
Sure. We call it the itty bitty shitty committee. It gets smaller and smaller and more distant over time. So the voices are getting fainter. They're always there.
Mm-hmm. This comes up a lot in workshops, and when I do these drawing as a verb sessions. Most times I try to get in this context setter of Kate is your bad duck. That's awesome. Heather, we were talking about this morning. Well, no, I actually did bring it up today. At some point, I try to bring up the big behemoth of the graphic facilitation Facebook group, which is what, 14,000 people now? I don't remember when it was 200, if that, yeah. And that group, so what happens is somebody gets new to the work, they find that group, and it scares the crap out of people. Why? Because, well, now it's mostly asking about digital techniques, but people are choosing their shiniest, brightest pieces from their portfolio, and that's all they're sharing, one. And two, they're not giving any context. I think it is still the header. That header with that beautiful face and profile, Alicia Bramlett, that might have been Alicia Bramlett with Sita, maybe, or maybe it's Sita. That gorgeous, high contrast, beautifully composed drawing that's the header in that group was not done live. It's something we call a knowledge wall, where you're building an image over a series of days. But you don't know that. You know, we assume that you look at these images and those things were made in the moment. Some of them were, but you wouldn't know it because nobody talks about the context. So, you know, I try to give that caveat and that kind of context around that group, because it's going to get that itty bitty shitty committee really going. It's going to get that bad duck quacking for sure. And this is the, you know, I love that phrase, don't compare your insides to somebody else's outsides. You know, it's like combine, don't compare your don't compare your process to somebody else's product, especially when you have no idea the context for it. So I can definitely understand that. Joe, do you want to comment on coming from the artist side? Please feel free.
Yes, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. Yep.
Okay. I recognize what you're talking about for sure. When you've got the art background, it's something you have to kind of put aside and just keep the good bits. But one of the good bits you probably recognize is that visual layout, visual organization that I learned. That's 100% usable in this field, as you know.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Thank you for sharing that, Joe, for sure. And it's, you know, I didn't say this specifically before, but, you know, I can't speak for you, Joe, and thankfully it wasn't so much my experience, but for a lot of people who love art, they're the introverts who love to while away by themselves and then go, ta-da! And that is not what this is. You know, you're doing all this work live in front of people, and collaboratively. So, you know, I think a lot of us who love making art, it's like, we love it because that's the thing we can control and nobody else has an opinion about it. Now, if you're in architecture or design, you know, we have clients, it's a different scenario. But yeah, Sarah just said you described my childhood. So yeah, right?
I can add to that.
Yeah, please.
I think the advantage for me was that I wasn't in an art school where I was learning about expressing things through visual medium, but more technical drawing skills, visual representation. I could see it'd be even harder for a true fine arts person.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to that, Joe. I was, personally, for me, I was very thankful I went to a liberal arts college instead of an art school, because it brought in just different abilities that worked with what I could do. So yeah. Sarah, do you want to talk any more about your childhood? Squirreled away? Drawing by yourself?
It made me laugh. I used to draw covers of Disney movie, like, you know, still frames from Disney movies, and I would spend hours like getting the colors and the contrast just right, and then I would come out of my room and show everyone, and it was, of course, it was perfect because I just spent hours on it. Exactly, and they're like, wow. Yeah, and I'm guessing, I don't want to project Sarah, but it's like, you just did this thing, and they're like, well, that's lovely, Sarah, and you're like, no, I just spent 16 hours on this. Exactly.
Yeah, the pain I went through. Totally. And Laura had said basics of design, color, line, and shape definitely help through coming from the art side of things. Absolutely. Catherine asks, tips for dealing with mistakes. One, you're human and you're in a room with other humans. I think that's probably number one. And I'll make sure I see the couple comments before above that. You're human. Like one of my favorite things that happened time and again was I misspell something and somebody calls me out on it in the group. And what happens? Everyone else in that room thinks that person's a total dick. Even if they recognize I misspelled it too, they're like, come on, buddy. You know, it's like, so, you know, there's the red pen people, right? But I think, you know, if somebody does call you out, you know, instead of, you know, going into some shame spiral, it's like, oh, you know what? Oh, thanks for catching that. Let me make sure I fix that. That's it. You know, we're just one human in a room with other humans. Very often, like I've had thankfully my listening skills and my spelling skills are solid. Very often the mistakes happen when it's an acronym and somebody's saying something really like P and L. Is that P and L or P letter N L? That kind of thing. Because you're not living in the same context as those clients. So those are totally times where, you know, just get something up there and then check in if they don't say something out loud. Are there?
Can I just respond
Please.
to that? Because I I appreciate the psychological because I need that too. But I was actually asking, in my mind, I was asking for technical. And I saw, I think it was Mateo put like Avery labels, but
Yes.
I mean, just like literal,
That's it.
just that's
Yep.
that easy.
It's that easy. Yes. Some people use whiteout pens, but I think it kind of gives you too plasticky of a line. It's hard to write over. Yeah. Avery mailing labels is exactly where it's at. I'm telling you. Yep. Let's see. I know we got some. Amanda said, I'm new to this and drawing is intimidating to me. Your story was helpful though, knowing that even artists have something new to learn. Completely. Artists have more to learn about visual facilitation, in my opinion. And I say that as an artist. Yeah, and practice. Yeah, just, yeah. And Kathy says to Catherine, true, and stay with a small population of icons and images to start. One of the few things that's repeated in both books is this drawing of my visual vocabulary, like the images I tend to use. So this page, in the idea shapers, it's page 406, but it's also in the graphic facilitators guide. I had this wonderful invitation, this was years and years and years ago, to do kind of like a master class with Vocablo folks in Germany. And Vocablo, they are totally the icon people. And every time I like start disparaging icons, I always want to have my aside, like, but not Vocablo, they're awesome. Because they do have a very systematic, rich way of teaching icons. They come at it from a different direction. And when I met Martin Hausman for the first time, I swear we're separated at birth. It was very freaky. But I was invited to give this workshop and I was super excited. And I was like, huh. I was sitting in my little hotel room in Fulda, Germany, and I was like, what images do I use? And I actually went through my portfolio page on my website and I sketched out a smaller scale than what you see because I redrew it the next morning. That's basically the imagery I use. And what I do is, you know, I have the kind of placeholder. If it's about tools, it's a wrench. I know it's not literally, they're not literally talking about wrenches, but that's the placeholder, right? Or like in that example of the fork, like I can use a fork, but I can make it a giant fork, or I can make it 14 forks, you know, if you're feeding the world or whatever. So it's actually not that many images, but I'm always thinking about how am I applying it and how flexible can it be? So I'm totally with Kathy there. And Sarah says, composition, negative space are what I bring from my art training, totally. I don't have time to focus on figure drawing anymore. Sarah, years and years later, I did a figure drawing, and it was so funny because usually with figure drawing, for folks who haven't done figure drawing, there's a live model, and usually you go through some very quick sketches first, where it might be 30 seconds or a minute, and then it's like a 5-minute sketch, and then it's more like a 30-minute or 40-minute sketch. Generally speaking, and I can't speak for Sarah, might have a different opinion about this, or other folks who've done figure drawing, most folks can't wait to get to the longer poses. And Kathy's nodding very loudly. Was that, if you want to unmute, I can see you're talking, but I can't hear you.
I just rejoined a drawing group and I'm dying for the 20-minute pose because 3 minutes, but 3 minutes is a very good drill for this because it forces you to make decisions quickly and measure quickly and stop overthinking it.
Yes.
It's having an art degree, you can get these stuff in your head
about
making an image and you have to let go of it. And you need to spend more time listening and less time wrestling with it.
Yes, for sure. And I don't, is it Hermika? Forgive me for not knowing how to pronounce your name.
I'm sorry. I usually put it in phonetic spelling. I didn't do it this evening.
What is it? Hermika. Thank you for your nodding on that. So I take it that resonated with you too. The overthinking and do you have time to think?
The overthinking, and also coming from an art background, I found that my artistic expression wasn't always intuitive for the person who it was for, even though it's like, oh, you have to understand. And as I started learning how to do this, and I'm still working on it, It looked like a little bit of creative chaos, but I clearly knew exactly where I was going. So
Totally.
I was drawing more than I was writing words and putting it together, and because I could make sense of it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely unraveling and unlearning that.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, like you said, you had this experience of those images, and they weren't in your head, you know, 'cause I'm sure it's a beautiful place to be. But, but, you know, and that's, I think a lot of times when people come, you came from an art background, so I know, but a lot of times if people haven't, they go, I've been, you know, text. Now I'm doing this work. Now it's like, oh, it needs to be image. And you can even get into this like, well, text is now bad and images are now good. I'm like, no, honey. Like, you know, you could take that same thing that was very pictorial with very little language and just freaking label it. And that was going to, you know, probably build the bridge between your experience in your head, you know, and what the audience experienced. But
correct. Correct. I was the death to PowerPoint person. So I would take the 20 slides and turn into one big picture and all was well. But it's different when you're scribing and you have to put structure and lay it out in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I saw some Ed Emberley love here too, but I think Kate said something about biology and I wanted to make sure I got that because Kate said, I started in marine biology and still lecture on that content. When I talk to high school and grad school classes, I have them come up and draw the ocean on the whiteboard or chalkboard first, and then we go from there. I tell them, if you don't think you can draw, just label it with an arrow. So I'm so glad I came back to you, Kate. That's totally right on. And they love it. So it's a good reminder about content and communication over exquisite art. And I saw marine biology. Where is Kate? Let me find. Hi, Kate. I thought I went into college thinking I was going to be nice. Love it. She's holding up a dolphin.
It's a whale shark.
It's a whale. Okay. It's a fishy thing.
Yeah, good work. If I labeled it with an arrow, we wouldn't have to have this situation.
Exactly.
So I should have just drawn it and said whale shark.
Exactly. I went into college thinking I was going to be a biology major. I thankfully had a really, really great biology teacher. But the reason I loved it was, one, it was hands-on, and two, it was about systems and taxonomy. You know, like that's a great thing about, anyway, that might be esoteric, but we all come from this in different directions, and we figure out like, what is it that appeals to us? And Kathy's holding up Ed Emberley. There we go. You found the fishy things? Did you find the fishy things in the book? That's awesome. Totally. And Heather had said, I'm a fine artist and I have a hell of a time trying to draw in real time. I feel like a hack, but my listening skills and thinking and synthesizing skills are strong, and that's really what matters. Amen, Heather. Now, do you, Heather, the feeling like a hack, is it just because you don't have the time to do the level of detail you did? Yeah.
Or do it well. Like I have a astigmatism, so when I draw people, I know how to draw a person if I'm sitting at a drawing, you know, at a drawing easel, and I'm at arm's length and I'm doing it and I have the time. When I do it really fast at the wall, because I might be drawing it bigger or whatever, I'll start drawing outside my astigmatism and everything starts looking really wonky.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm good at drawing zombies, but everything other than that is not good. Everybody looks like a zombie.
Or they've melted, you know, somebody left to melt in the sun.
Proportion is off. Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like that's a very totally different objective. You know, sitting at that table drawing, you know, representationally. They have different functions. So when we beat ourselves up because we're taking something we were good at in a different context and apply it to another context, it's like, you know, give yourself some grace that that's not the context you're in at the moment. And I'm sure you've gotten there for sure. No? Okay, well, try it. Give yourself some more grace. These kits I'm creating for the Envision conference, if anyone's joining me, it's a tiny detail, but I'll give it away. And the very first page, the welcome page, I say, you know, here's a few things I need from you as a participant. And one of them is to be kind. And I said, no, I attract the most awesome people. I need you to be kind to yourself. So please hold on to that. And I'm going to keep looking at the chat here. I'd love to just kind of, any questions about the model in general? Did it make sense? Is there any clarifying questions? Do you think that could be useful? Do you think I'm full of hooey? I'm guessing you're all too polite to just tell me I'm full of hooey. So.
I think what you shared was strong. You being full of hooey, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, so let me just share. This is Alelia here.
Yeah.
It was very strong for me, very helpful for me. I don't necessarily do graphic recording. I have a desire to do that. I train and I teach, and so I do a lot of graphic facilitation. And so the way you laid that out and kind of define the different types of layouts was very helpful to me to understand which may be better for the scenario that I'm in. So
awesome.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And that's the thing. I hopefully you, yes, it is a straight line in that it's from most linear and text-based to most spatial. But again, you know, it doesn't, I would love, the biggest thing is I want folks to hopefully stretch into more parts of that line, of that spectrum. And very much to what you said, be able to recognize what a situation needs. Because it is not all about us all getting to number 7. And like we said with the questions, like there's plenty of folks who 7's not the way their brain works, or 7 is not the way their brain works live. And that's totally legit. Kathy, yes, thank you for pointing out Ed Emberley's Make a World. It breaks down images into simple shapes. For art majors like me, it gets me out of my head and into visual communication. Yeah, 3 books: Make a World, Drawing Book of Faces, Drawing Book of Animals. You can draw pretty much anything ever with those 3 Ed Emberley books. And I always say that talking about the dysfunctional family, my dad was an amazing artist. He was extremely skilled, and he was a total jerk about it. I consider Ed Emberley my nicer drawing dad, my second drawing dad, because I was that kid who checked his books out from the library over and over and over again. And for those of us who like very systematic things, it is gorgeous, the step-by-step. Brian says, I was saying to Kate, you have a hang up about not repeating the same icon on a chart. Yeah, you have to get over that, Brian. That repetition could be really useful. I just see, you don't have any, you're just laughing. Okay. Nothing to say on that, Brian?
Well, that was in the context of when you did that inventory of all the stuff you draw, and I did too, and I wound up with like 40 icons, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it's like I get the feeling like, oh, if somebody sees me draw that laptop one more time, they're gonna be like, wait, you only know how to draw one laptop, and they're gonna start throwing stuff at me.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to. Well, I haven't had that experience. I'm sure I've repeated stuff because I'm not shy about repeating stuff, but I'm like, has anyone ever called me out on? There's the laptop again, Agerbeck. I love the shout out for the Noun Project. That is fantastic, very useful. Because the great thing about the Noun Project and the icons is they are so simplified. You know, you can get a sense of exactly what the essence of something is. Kathy's pointing out the mural has a fantastic symbol search engine too, for sure. Brian says the best graphic facilitator you know doesn't draw. He will draw something that looks like a potato and then put horns on it and label it cow. Awesome. And it totally works, right? Yeah, for sure. Is there anything you would prefer not to be shared on our event photos? Oh, that was to be privately. Okay. Sorry, Brian.
It's okay.
That was the behind the scenes stuff.
Brandy, that you'd prefer not to be shared, because a lot of this is your intellectual property you're about to teach a class, is just anything for us that you'd prefer not get out there, screenshots?
I decided that this model was needed to be shared. I didn't have to hold on to it. I mean, I want people, if anyone uses it, please credit me because it is my stuff. But yeah, please, no problem. No problem.
And if you have been taking some sketch notes, on the events page of the meetup, there is a place where you can stick photos. So please place them there.
Awesome. And I'll have to, Kate gave a shout out to her friend, Catherine Madden, who does hand-drawn data visualization. That's awesome. She's a new name to me, so I'll make sure I check her out. Lots of love for Ed Emberley. Awesome. What other, we've got almost a half hour. I welcome questions. Certainly, I would ask that we start with ones about the model, but I'm open. You know, what kind of questions do you got, or stories or comments? I'm adaptable, like I said.
One thing I like about your linear thing is that it kind of connects like how to build to the next level. So it's not just, oh, I need to get better at synthesis. You're like, oh, like I kind of know there's steps along the way, and there's like specific things I can work on like to get there. So it's not such an overwhelming thing to try to go from linear list to synthesis. You're like, okay, this thing is here.
You
and
see those
yeah.
transitions, yeah.
Yeah, and then also even figuring out like because some things really like don't need synthesis, they need this other thing. So just having that kind of layout to be like, okay, what is it I'm trying to accomplish and what best supports that?
Yep, really for sure. When I think about our community specifically as a community of practice and as a profession, my biggest thing is, I'm going to be blunt, I see way too many people stuck in scattergram. That is the only thing they can do. And I want to see people more able and to develop the skills of those different levels of hierarchy in the chart. That's, I think, when your own came to me about the anthology with this, you know, juicy invitation to write this article for this anthology. And it was funny because they had a very, very specific word limit. And I don't know what actually ended up happening if they just, but basically it said, okay, here's an invitation. What would you like to write on? It's this many words. And it was, and I came back to him. I said, okay, either I can give you this thing, which is going to be 10 pages, or I can figure out something that's 3 pages worth. And I'm very thankful he said, no, we'll give you the pages. Don't worry about it. Because, you know, he could tell even in the description that could be a useful model for, you know, seeing those transitions and seeing that larger context. So I'm very thankful they gave me pages. So what other stories or questions or comments? I'm here, you got me here. Any if I cornered Brandy in an event, I'd ask her this or tell her this. Please be nice.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I think this was one of your books, but it's been a while since I've read it.
Yep.
So you're at these events and everybody comes up and says, this is so cool. And then what do you do about the people who say, that's not what I said? I don't want to see that on there. How do you handle that?
I'm not trying to be cheeky. I personally get that very rarely because the listing skills. I've had, so if that happened, you know, never happened and never. If that happens, I would, you know, just be gracious and say, oh, thank you. Like, you know, now, if I knew they said something else, but they think they communicated something else, that's tricky, right? But if it is simply that, you know, they use different wording and they wanted to make sure their wording was reflected, that's totally a case where it'd be like, oh, you know what? Let me fix that. You know, that's not something, you know. I did once have a very difficult conversation with a facilitator where the CEO started with opening remarks, and he added a number halfway through what he was doing, right? And so afterwards, the facilitator came up to me and he's like, you missed the content, because he said 3 things. And I was like, no, there was not 3 things. He said this, and then he said he said this, and then he said number 3. And that was one of those situations where, you know, I knew I got it, but I had my boss basically saying, you know, well, anyway, that's not a useful story, was it? That stuff happens and it's awkward, but.
I find it useful because, you know, whether you feel like it had a resolution or not a resolution, we could find ourselves in a position where they've hired us to do this interpretation of what we're hearing.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned in 5B that you may have one color for what was actually said, and then you may go back with the blue and add your interpretation around maybe some synthesis around what was being said.
Yep.
To really hit home for the audience. And
Yeah.
so maybe the speaker or facilitator doesn't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah.
As long as we understand that there's a possibility that someone could come up and say anything, at least for me, I'm not going to feel like this has never happened to anyone before.
Right. No, totally. No, we're human. We're so human. Yeah. Thank you for that, for sure. And just a very technical thing. I don't actually color code synthesis separately. It's just done like that in the model.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's just to demonstrate that level in the diagram. A situation that's similar is what happens when somebody comes up to you and they say something to you not during the event and they want it in the chart. Has anyone had that experience? I'm seeing some nods. Yeah. The worst case of that I ever had was I was in Newark, and it was a whole like symposium on green jobs. And I don't know what it was about that event, but I had easily a dozen people come up to me and say, what we really need to do is this. Like, while I'm working live and I'm trying to listen to what's actually being said to the group. Yeah, Kathy, that's exactly the, like, what? And that I just had to say, you know, my very quick answer is, if you say that in the large group, I'll be happy to capture it. Because I'm not going to sneak anything into that chart that the group didn't experience. You know, that's not in integrity to their experience. So if you run into that kind of thing, I recommend that answer, because I want to make sure that they recognize their work. Similarly, I know different people have different philosophies about this. I'm one of those folks that when they're done talking, I'm done drawing. You know, I might finish up a couple, you know, bits of shading or something, but I'm not adding anything, any new content to that drawing that they didn't experience. For the same reason, I want them absolutely to recognize their experience in that drawing.
It feels like if you don't draw that boundary, you're going to be doing a lot of work that, you know, they didn't necessarily even bring to their presentation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, well, there's just the tactical thing of what do you do when you've agreed to one thing, and then, like, often I'll contract and do all the planning with one person, but they're not the boss. You know, you get in the room and then there's the boss that, you know, comes in, you're like, oh, okay. You know, and you learn those dynamics as you go. But the best example of that was I had a wonderful experience contracting, getting everything set up with this woman. And it was a little bit of an odd situation because it was a training. It was very specifically a training workshop. And I would not put that in the center of the target of where this work is most effective. But I get there early, I get all set up, and 2 minutes before we start, her boss came in, walked straight up to me and said, no, you're going to be distracting. You need to go over there. Has anyone else had that experience?
Wow.
I'm seeing a couple nods, definitely smiles of acknowledgement, of recognition. And that was a case where, you know, it's like really abrupt. It's 2 minutes, right? And this is, you'll hear me say this 400 times in the Graphic Facilitator Confidential course, which is specifically about business. You have to advocate for yourself in the role. You know, like you had an understanding with one client and then the boss comes in, but really I'm there to serve the group in the process. And I'm the one person in this room that knows this work, this tool, this methodology better than anyone else in the room. So when she came at me and she's like, and she wasn't like super aggressive, it was just blunt and badly timed, right? And behind her is the woman I contracted with, literally standing behind her going like this, like I don't know, what do we do? And thankfully enough experience and willing to advocate for myself, I said, I asked her, you know, have you experienced this before? And she said, no. Of course she's going to be scared. She doesn't know why the heck they spent that much money for me to be there and do this thing, right? And I said, so everything I'm drawing is in service of what you're training. And just that sentence, just with that sentence, her shoulders lowered, which, you know, we're up here. You know, she kind of dropped her shoulders, and thankfully on the first break, she came up to me and said, you're totally right. But that's that thing of who's in charge. And even if there is the hierarchy within the organization, you as the practitioner are the advocate for these processes, these methods. So hopefully that story was useful.
There's some cool, like, nice questions in the chat.
Awesome. What do you see?
So one about anything you want to share about your new setup in your robot office. Another one is, With learning how to grow and how to break out of a certain style, like popcorn, would it help to know the facilitation style about to be done in the room, like the back of your hand?
Mm-hmm.
And then another question about how do clients use your output after an event? Examples of shelf life beyond the event. Three very different questions.
Yeah, totally. So first one was the tech setup. The second one was, I didn't hold it in my brain. The second,
learning how to break out of a certain
breakout. Thank you. And knowing the agenda. And the third was, sorry, I can tell I've been on all day.
using clients using your output after that event.
Thank you. So the tech setup, this is very much built to be able to teach live. And I already had a setup for asynchronous, like, again, I have no problem being alone in a room looking at that lens. But yeah, the setup so far is going great. And I love it. And I love that right now, these two screens, I have 4 screens, it's 2x2. And here is the one I'm doing Zoom from. What will happen is that second screen will be for the graphics. Whatever you're kind of showing that's going into the Zoom. And then the top 2 screens are your faces. So it's awesome to be able to see. I haven't seen any pets. Do some of you people have pets? Because I love it when I see a cat walk across somebody. Thank you.
I have a pet, yeah.
Yeah.
He's probably gonna start barking soon. He wants to go outside.
Nice. But that's kind of, one of the nice things about this kind of setup is being able to see your faces and see responses. And that's why I do like it when people are on video. Oh, there we go, Greg. That's a beautiful pup. Nice. That's a great shaggy pup. So tech setup's going great. How to break out of certain structures. I know this isn't a very satisfying answer, but I think a lot of it's practice, and practice with lots of different types of content and practicing not on projects. I think a whole lot of folks don't recognize that there's like infinite content in the world they can practice with. So instead it's like, I did this project, it was super high stakes, I was scared to death. I worked, that's a nice looking cat there, Kathy. Awesome. Now I'm just gonna get distracted by animals. So that, you do the project and then there's like this gap before the next project. But, I recommend different types of content. I recommend, maybe it is live in a meeting. If you're in meetings, I think a lot of us who, work for ourselves aren't thankfully in a lot of meetings. But it can be, I can listen to this podcast and get a sense of its patterns and structures. And that's training you to recognize those kind of patterns in client projects. Or I listen to this other piece of content and notice that it tends to be, this other kind of shape. So it's just kind of putting yourself in front of lots of different types of content. You can also, I'm trying to think you could try putting some scaffolding up, at practicing not live, because that's, the client projects are really high stakes. I don't think a lot of people would be comfortable, trying something brand new live, but, I really like in the lab, I use this podcast called 99% Invisible a lot. It's a great podcast in itself. But what I like is that I've recognized it's 14 minutes. It's about a topic. Roman Mars, which I think is like such a epic name, Roman Mars, is the host. And it tends to have a similar kind of structure. He introduces a concept. Thank you for the link, Rachel. That's perfect. He introduces a concept. Sometimes the concept is on target for the whole show. Sometimes it's a MacGuffin. Sometimes it's it pivots into something else. But there'll be sort of like this preamble, and then he gets into the meat of the story, which often has lots of different people he's interviewed, and then it ends with a nice kind of conclusion. But that's just, so I like that as content because there's structure, but it doesn't have to be that source, but it's the idea that you're listening to different sources or listening to enough of a single source that you can be picking up on those patterns. I don't know if practice is such a big, broad. Anyone else have advice on how to kind of break those patterns? I think definitely, the more you feel comfortable having the conversation with the client, the better, and it's tough because if I went to a client, if I was nervous and I'm like, okay, I'm going to try something I haven't tried before, and I show that to the client, that's going to make the client nervous. So this is some of that kind of like You got to fake it till you make it. You kind of have to like, put on the poker face. And, but if you can kind of say to a client, like, all right, so I think it's going to be this kind of shape. What do you think? Now, some of them will just say, that's your job. I don't even know. But others might say, you know what, actually, I think, that kind of structure is going to be too limiting for this part of the agenda. That kind of finding a way to confidently throw out an idea with the client and have that conversation is definitely going to give you a lot more input on what that shape might need to be. And then the third question was, Mike, did I forget it again, Rachel? I might have.
Client
Shelf life.
Oh, what did I do? Thank you. Yes. So I don't know. I don't, honestly, this is gonna sound really rude. I kind of don't care. Only because the way I set expectations with clients and what I think the value in my work is, just use that beautiful old broad 80-20 rule. I always tell clients 80% of this is that group seeing their conversation take shape. 20% of it's the artifact. Now, what I do say to folks is, especially when that client is like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. We're going to put it behind plexiglass in the, in this common area. They want to treat it like a masterpiece. That's when I say, yeah, Mateo's at I'm so excited. You're excited, but please don't do that. Because it's not going to make sense to people who weren't there. So if they want to do that, I always say, have a plaque that describes the process. Or, if they're going to have to do that, right? They're just too excited. But I always say it's an artifact. It's a snapshot of this moment in time. Yeah. And, it's going to change. You're going to have a different experience. You're going to have, you're going to iterate this, or you're going to have an entirely different topic. Some of this from this meeting is going to be useful. Some of it isn't, but it's not going to communicate to people who weren't in the room. It will to like a fraction of an extent. So my personal belief is, as long as it was helpful for them in the moment, awesome. I love it. This is my favorite. Like one of my favorites was a president of a restaurant group, and he loved the charts. He basically wallpapered his office, and they were his working documents. And I'm like, if every client did that, that would be so dreamy. And I tell people, like, if you want to mark them up, put Post-it notes on them. That's how I view them. Clients usually think it's like this magical, this magical talisman that, can't be messed up, but that's my philosophy about it. Certainly I love it when I come back, like that scholar practitioner conversation. That was happily one of many projects with DePaul University here in Chicago. And they had this really brilliant, beautiful grad program that unfortunately was ending, or yeah, it was pretty much ending. And they pulled out all the charts. And they basically, they had this amazing space where me and another colleague who both did work for them, it was just such a gorgeous kind of museum of all their process, all their progress on the walls. So Rachel, do you have more questions for me?
Yeah,
7 minutes-ish.
Some follow-ups. Dave wants to know, are you standing? Are you with your screens in front of you? You said robot. Where's the robot? Like, what's the robot?
It's a robot in my mind. I am standing. I've learned that it's a huge reason I love doing graphic facilitation is I'm moving my whole body in front of that large scale piece of paper. I'm a kinesthetic person. Clearly I'm visual, but I'm equally, if not more, hands-on and kinesthetic. So yeah, I'm standing right now, and I actually built this, basically all of this is built on an adjustable table. It's a Husky brand table from Home Depot, but it's got a hand crank. So if I do want to sit, I can lower it to sitting height. I don't know if folks remember that derecho storm that went through the US on August 10th. That was actually went over my studio and blew off the roof. It became a tornado over my studio here in Chicago. And it just happened that the next morning I had one of my drawing as a verb sessions, about 90 minutes. And that particular session, I'm seated and like my whole body language is like collapsing into that little space, right? I'm trying to keep all my wild gestures in the frame. And that one went a half hour over, so it's 2 hours. I got off that call and I literally felt like my hands were separated from my brain. It was very freaky. And an hour later, my whole arm went numb. And I went, wow, you can't treat your brain like a jar separate from your body. So that's probably an unnecessary story, but that is why I now have my standing space here that I'm very happy for. And the reason I call it a robot is right now I've got these 4 screens, and as I was drawing out the schematics for this, the webcam I'm looking at right now is one of the Logitech Brios, which is that kind of lozenge shape. And I was just jokingly looking at this because it's got like the table has 2 legs. This is like a giant face. And now that there's this camera shape like this, I'm not going to have a second camera over here, but I'm actually going to just have like some kind of something to make an eyeball. So this is Winky. So if you saw the names Winky Robot and Blinky Robot, those are my monitors I'm looking at you through. And you know, it's like, it's freaking fun. So I'm going to put some arms on it that are going to hold lights because I can. And yeah, so it is my teaching robot, Winky.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we have about another 5 minutes.
Okay.
I just want to kind of we have time for more questions. If anybody has any last questions, drop them in the chat. I also do want to say a big thank you to Brandy for coming to this doing this with Nova Scribes.
Yeah, happy to.
Check out her very exciting things coming up and all her books, and there's lots of resources in her brain that are no longer in her brain, and you can access them.
Yes. Yes, please.
And we have some meetup stuff coming up. We have one on Thursday, and then lunch next week, and then 2 after that. So just go to the meetup site and check them out. And yeah, we still have some time, but I think officially maybe we can close now.